can we cite articles we have not purchased? In memoriam, Aaron Schwartz.
Well,
I don't know if this is an anniversary or like why that comes up right now. I don't know why
it comes up. I mean, it may not be temporal at all. It may just be that Aaron Schwartz was being pursued for having to liberate articles that we paid to produce as citizens who pay taxes and we're not allowed to see.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I have no doubt that people regularly cite articles that they have not read and have not purchased access to.
Well, purchase is different from read.
Yep.
I cite and read a lot of articles that I don't purchase.
Sure. In honor of Aaron Schwartz. But
I'll just say, the sort of his efforts. I don't know to what degree it's understood as an academic, as an intellectual descendant, but Sci-Hub, which I started sort of having to use at the point that we lost access to Princeton University's research library, whenever that was, last summer, and had been using a little bit in sort of 2018 as well. Actually had been trying to use a lot and I found it really not up to the job, and increasingly it is up to the job. And we also, there are some more journals now that are doing open access, or at least limited. We'll say, you can have X number of peer-reviewed articles before we start charging you.
Yep. People cite articles they don't read all the time based on abstracts. Obviously, that's going to sometimes be the result of people not having access to the article and not pursuing it through Sci-Hub or whatever. Obviously, this is a dumb system. If we're paying for the research, not being able to read it is absurd. Obviously, the positive feedback that comes from better resourced institutions having access to more journals, and therefore academics at those institutions being able to write papers that are based on a wider read of the literature, is an absurdity.
Yep, it's positive feedback.
Yeah, like everything else, this needs a total rethink.
Yep. And there are, the sort of the end runs, which are, none of the Elsevier doesn't want Sci-Hub to exist. But there are sort of intermediate things, and I don't know exactly what the formal position by Elsevier is across the board for things like, like ResearchGate and academia.edu, I want to say, although I'm not sure that's right, but places where researchers themselves, authors of research articles themselves, can put up PDFs of their own work.
Yeah.
And so, if you're doing a search on Google Scholar, very often, if there's a link to a PDF, it will be through, you're not going to get a Sci-Hub link that way, but you'll often get a ResearchGate or an academia link that way.
Yeah, and there's an ambiguity here, right? You're not allowed to, print off a copy of a copyrighted book, but I can buy a book and I can give it or loan it to you without violating a copyright. Can the author of a scientific work hand it out? That's always been traditional. You could write to the author and they will send you the PDF and you don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, but digital handouts change the rules. And
Right. But I think the thing that is most interesting here, what we should really say, is you and I have again and again said, look, we are willing to pay a fee to simply have access to the kind of libraries that we had when we were at Michigan, for example.
That's right.
It does not appear to be possible. And this is a tremendous mystery because so many people, whether it's journalists or, independent scholars or whatever, need the access. And this is one way. It's basically an artificial monopoly on knowledge.
Yes.
And it's disastrous. It's despicable. And it's amazing that the market hasn't figured out that there is a price that people would be willing to pay in order to simply have full access.
Now, it's huge. And, actually, I purchased access to Science just in order to get their full rundown every week of what they think the most important things were happening every week were. And to be able to read the full articles because, most those articles aren't going to be available other ways right away, right? You can't, anyone who is in any way a generalist as a scientific thinker cannot purchase simply go, okay, well, I'm going to purchase like the really big ones like Science and Nature, and also, the 5 journals in my field, and then I'm covered. That's fine if what you're working on is so narrow and you've basically said to yourself and to the world, nothing that is in any way outside of my very blinded narrow scope is of interest to me. Then yeah, you're staying up on the research such as it is. But just like roaming the stacks of an actual physical library allows for serendipity, allows for you to discover books or journals or whatever it is that you didn't even know existed, much less were interested in, so too does actually having access to a world-class library in electronic form allow you to do searches. Some of these indexing databases that don't necessarily have the full text, but allow you to do searches that are more powerful even than, the Google Scholar search, or at least this was true until a couple of years ago. And then go, oh, wow, look at all of these things across journals that I may not have even heard of, much less am going to put down, a couple $100 for a year's subscription for a journal for whom there's one article right now that I think I might be interested in. No, you need research university quality access to libraries. And it's astounding that, yes, although anyone can buy access to an individual journal if they want for a year, and it's not cheap. What you do not appear to be able to buy, at least you didn't the last time we looked actively into it, year and a half or 2 ago, was access of the sort that you get at an R1 university library, at a research university library.
And, if you're at a lower tier place, you have interlibrary loan agreements often. However, the point is it still provides this massive advantage to the people at the R1s, because the way research works, if you're working on a general topic, as I was doing with telomeres, where I was dealing with journals that I'd never read before because I was in a literature that wasn't my home turf, right? You could read a paper, you find something important that you need to chase down, and you're in its bibliography, you get that paper, you're 3 or 4 papers deep before you know what it is that you're, whether this is a fruitful avenue or not.
Exactly.
That could be weeks down the road if you're doing it through interlibrary loan, whereas it could be an hour down the road if you're doing it looking at the papers and able to source them electronically.
That's right. And this is actually, at least at the point that we left Evergreen, it was the case that in Washington state, unlike in California, all of the public institutions in the state did not get access to the electronic library resources of the flagship institution, the flagship public institution, which is University of Washington. So in California, no matter what community college you're at, or Cal State University or UC University you're at, if you are a faculty staff student at any public institution of higher ed, 2-year, 4-year, doctorate, undergraduate, whatever, in California, you have access to the electronic library database for the entire system. Whether or not you've ever set foot on Berkeley's campus, you obviously, interlibrary loan for actual books will take some time, right? But the journals, which is where most of the cutting edge research has tended to be published, was available to you just as easily if you're a community college student as if you were a PhD student at UCLA or Berkeley. Whereas in Washington, what was, unfortunately quite obvious very quickly to us, being at one of the public institutions in the state, was that Washington had no such agreement, such that UW's amazing first-class Research One library was not available to anyone else in the state. And this is... It's, I don't know if predatory is exactly the right word, but it's certainly regressive and aggressive and deeply competitive.
It's exclusionary.
And it's exclusionary. And what is public education for, if not even to make equal the opportunity to the research among all of the students who are engaged in the public education system? Right, much less all of us who aren't at some formal institution.
Yeah, for one thing, it turns people who would pursue the information on their own into obligate consumers.
Right.
So you have to accept a fact check in lieu of going to check the facts yourself because you don't have access to the journals necessary to do it. And this may seem a small matter, but at the moment, we really need high quality science journalists. And the problem is this is a barrier to their functioning because they will always be hobbled relative to the journalists who have the access purchased by, major papers or whatever.